Join us every Wednesday for InFocus, a weekly talk show produced by the SKNIS Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. InFocus, your government, your business.
I'm Ian Richards. Welcome to InFocus, a weekly program where we zoom in on what's happening within and throughout the government, your government. The Right Honourable Dr. Denzil Douglas has served St. Kitts and Nevis with distinction for the last 35 years in and out of government as the elected Member of Parliament for St. Christopher VI. He was first elected in 1989. Now, the Federation's developed landscape testifies to the wide-ranging contributions of Dr. Douglas, who spearheaded an ambitious transformative agenda from 1995 to 2015, when he served as the nation's second Prime Minister. Dr. Douglas is with us today for a candid discussion as we look back on his distinguished career to date, the sacrifices he has made along the way, and his drive to keep serving. Stay with us as we delve into your government, your business. Thanks for staying with us, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome back to InFocus the Right Honourable Dr. Denzil Douglas. Sir, it's a pleasure to have you back on InFocus.
Thank you for having me, Ian.
Right.
Thank you.
So you would have seen, sir, and those who would have been watching online and watching live on ZIZ, some pictures when you were sworn in back in 1989, excuse me. I'm sure it would have brought back some memories of that time for you.
Of course, it really brought back many memories, because as I was being sworn in then, relatively young age, and considering what I knew had transpired for the 15 years, well, not then 15 years, but maybe 10 years before, I wondered whether I was up to the task. The Labour Party, which had been in government for a long time, until 1980, was entering the Parliament back in 1989 after being in opposition for nearly 10 years. There were only two of us, the Honourable Sam Kondo and myself. And at that time, after that election and at the swearing ceremony, we had His Excellency Walford Combs as a senator. So you must understand the apprehension that one had. The good thing about it, though, at that time, we knew that we had the support of the St. Kitts and Nevis Trades and Labour Union in the presence and in the personality and the achievements of Walford Combs, who had been then the deputy president, I think it was vice president of the union. And there was Kondo, who had come through the ranks of the movement. And there was I from the historic village of St. Paul's, constituency number 6, which very early in the colonial days had made an impact by the presence of Robert Llewellyn Bradshaw, national hero, and F.T. Williams, Frederick Theophilus Williams, also from St. Paul's, who had been in previous administration. So one wondered whether I was up to the task. But I felt very strongly that with the support of the people and having performed well in the elections, we were on the stage, we were about to contribute to history, and I was determined with God's help to do my best.
So the question is then, Dr. Douglas, essentially as you look back at your time when you entered Parliament, who is Dr. Denzil Douglas really? And how did he get to where he is right now?
A very important question, because as I said a moment ago, Denzil Douglas was a relatively young man who had come out of the village of St. Paul's in constituency number 6. Today I call it the Republic of St. Paul's. But there was the history, my own upbringing. I was the last of many children in my family. My mother having died when I was 1 year old. My father was an ordinary man, worked in the sugar industry as a checker at the siding. And during the dull season, he was a tailor by trade, and so he practiced his tailoring. He was a local preacher, so naturally in that home, we grew up knowing God, knowing the Bible, back to cover, from front to back cover, and had done quite a number of Bible courses as a young boy.
Did you flirt with the idea of going into religion?
Well, my father being a local preacher, and eventually my sister, Janet, became and is still an ordained reverend in the Wesleyan Holiness Church. So there was always in that family strong Christian religious principles. So, and then I had the opportunity back in 1965 to have gone to the grammar school on a scholarship from His Excellency, Right Excellence Sir Robert Llewellyn Bradshaw. And I was always told that I was bright. And so I felt that maybe something good will come out of me. And I tried.
Okay. And so you came from a time, as you spoke about earlier, that where your father would have passed, your mother, sorry. And so the community came together, essentially, and helped to raise you. And so that is something that you grew up with. Do you think that it happens now? That the community helps to raise children in society? And if not, do you think it's something that we need to get back to?
Right. I think the community today tries, but it's much more challenging. Because in those days, really, I would be not only the son of Charles and Loretta Douglas, but I would have been Banksy Douglas' boy, seen by other people in the village whom they can speak to. And if there was any rudeness on my part, went straight to my father. So the community, to a large extent, contributed in your own upbringing. I think to a large extent it happens today. It's just that it might be less effective. But I still think that there is a strong community spirit, especially in close-knit communities. And St. Paul's and the other communities in number 6 and around the island are still to some extent close-knit. But I think the attitude would have changed. And people today, younger people, seem to have a sense of, well, mind your own business. And so the teachings that would normally come from the community at large, from the church, from those who were the leaders in the community, I think that is less impactful, but it is still there.
Okay. So we move now to your life in public service. Now you've been in public service, as it was recalled, for more than half of your life. Do you think that a life of public service was your destiny? I asked earlier about, if you ever flirted with the idea of becoming a pastor. Do you think a life of public service was really your destiny?
Well, I think to a large extent, I saw it developing over the years. I mentioned a moment ago about the community. One of the things that my father used to have me do is go to homes of the elderly, and especially those whose children would have migrated to the United Kingdom, and some of those early years, Dominican Republic as well, and would help to read their letters from their children that would have come in. One of the things I did as well, because I went into Bastia every day, because I went to grammar school every day, basically during school time, people would bring money, money exchange, the pounds and so forth. And they would ask you to go to the post office to change money, to post letters. So I would not only sometimes read and write the responses to their children, but I would have the opportunity, especially since stamps were not sold in the village, go to the Bastia post office and buy stamps and send off.
And essentially you had to read the letters because they were unable to.
Most of them were unable.
Right.
Of course, would not tell you as a child that they cannot read. They would say that their eyes are dark and so don't see well. So you read the letters for them. But you understood what was happening. And so I was always there to serve. One thing I would also recall is the influence of the 4-H organization led by Basil Henderson in those days. The influence of that organization on bringing me into the public sphere. We used to go to have our annual convention on Easter Monday. And that's a time when we were being exposed to the ministers of government and prominent persons in the community. Mr. Warren, who was the manager of the factory at those days, Agnes Kerwin, Sir Probin Innes, all those people, prominent people, who we were exposed to at a very early age as members of the 4-H organization. And so we had a number of things to do. Of course, the 4-H's, head, heart, hands, and health. And a lot of that involved public service. So I think I got involved in public service from that very early involvement with the 4-H organization. We had agricultural gardens, used to raise fowls, chickens. Some of us sold eggs, and so many different projects. And a lot of it was not necessarily to make money for you, but in service to the community. And so I always had that public service spiritedness, if you want to call it that, at a very early age.
What sacrifices have you made along the way during this life of public service?
To a large extent, I think not being able to do what you want to do for yourself because you always thought of doing something for others. I believe that if I had pursued my medical career beyond the 9 years that I was engaged in that, I could have achieved a lot. I'm not going to say more, because I believe I've achieved quite a bit. But that would have brought me, I believe, maybe enormous wealth. You can never tell. And maybe would have been more prominently on the regional or international stage. But then I can't even say that, because the politics that I got involved in relatively early took me to those same boundaries and gave me that same exposure and brought me quite a bit of satisfaction because I loved what I was doing. I believed that I was called to be a doctor, medical doctor. But somehow, even though I diverted, I believe that I'm doing, or I was doing, what I was called to do. The mixing, of course, of the medicine with political public life. And then when I think back on even the very subjects that I did in sixth form, I had a mixture of English, history, and biology. And when I made those choices, as I went into sixth form, I really didn't see that it would become a very, very important mix for my own personal development and to be prepared to help others whom I had to serve. Mixture of arts, science, in the end, became medical doctor. And then use my history in particular, my appreciation of history, knowing what was happening in different parts of the world at the same time. What was happening in Europe, how Europe influenced the Caribbean, what was happening in Latin America, and how Europe influenced that, and what was happening around the world. I did European history in particular, the Renaissance period, that's what I did. And of course, history of the Caribbean generally is what I did for the special part of the history. So that brought me in contact with how people were living, not only here, but around the world. Why we were as we were. What exactly I was reading about, especially in the history of the Caribbean and in the colonial structure and so forth. I saw it in my own village of St. Paul's. I was surrounded by Cranston Estate, Brotherson's Estate, Willards, Keynes's, all the Rollins, all those were estates around my little home village of St. Paul's. And you saw what you were reading, so that you even became very inventive and articulate. Sometimes I remember would be writing essays for Mrs. Esdale, Doreen Esdale, and it would be so graphic. She would want to know what book I was reading and so forth. But I was reliving what I saw happening on the estates.
And the thing about history is that it often repeats itself, of course.
Exactly.
It would have been useful when you became as this Prime Minister saying it's in your life in public service.
Exactly. So what you were seeing there, the struggles that I was experiencing when I became a young parliamentarian and going into how people lived, the importance of the trade union, the struggle for better wage, better living conditions, etc. The movement away from child labor. And as people moved away from the sugar estates to the factories which were being established in the industrial estates. And you saw that and you were able to appreciate how that was happening and how there was a movement in the further development of our people as employment was being diversified and new employment opportunities presented themselves as our people advanced.
And so, of course, it also meant, in terms of giving up the life as of a medical doctor, where you might have specialized or go on to, as you mentioned, make millions. It also meant that choosing the life that you chose, being a politician, you were always in the public eye. That scrutiny was always there. How did you cope with that? Because, of course, that is a very important sacrifice, because as human beings, we appreciate and we love our privacy.
Right. And you're right about that. One, therefore, had to be very circumspect in what you did. Because not only did you have to convey at all times the respect, admiration that the medical doctor would attract in small societies like these, but as a politician, you also had to make sure that your conduct in public life, your conduct in public generally, was acceptable to the point where it would not be a distraction and thus preventing you from advancing politically in your chosen career. I mean, I got quite a bit of pleasure and joy in saying certain things in a particular way on the platform. Not necessarily being vulgar, not necessarily being offensive to the delicate ears, but to ensure that my audience was listening and that my audience was understanding the language that I used to convey the thoughts, the ideas, and put forward programs and policies which I think were going to be critically important in setting the stage for moving our country and our people forward.
Dr. Douglas, 35 years later, did you envisage back then that you'd be still serving today?
You know, that's a very, very tough question. I said tough because it brings back some memories that are real, but which I would not have liked to have happened. In fact, someone asked me just the other day, why you stay in politics so long? And I think I was really at the point of seriously moving out of the political arena and maybe reconsidering medicine again. Maybe 2015 might have been my last. But as you know, we had some turbulence in the party. Results did not turn out the way I had expected. I felt to a large extent when I looked around, the leadership of the party, where the party was, I felt that you had to try to bring this party back into office because it was unfair in the way that we had lost the government. And so although I was prepared then to move on to other things, I thought about it very, very seriously, and I decided I would stay. And so that's why I have stayed. And I have no regrets because it paid off. We're back in government. Labour is in charge, of course, with the support of the people. And I believe, therefore, the agenda that I believe we were given from those who were before us, those who passed on the mantle in 1989, as they exited, I think that I had a responsibility as one of the surviving leaders to ensure that the party, the people, and the country would benefit from the policies and the programs and the ideas of our great party to move our country and the people forward. Not Labour people, not just Labour people, but to move the citizens of our country forward to a higher and better plane.
And we'll talk a bit more about those policies that you would have led while you were at the helm here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And we're going to take a quick break before we do that, Dr. Douglas. We'll be right back with more In Focus.
If you haven't done it as yet, please do it today. Subscribe to our YouTube page at SKNIS Media for regular updates, live coverage, and even more information on your government. While you're at it, like, share, and interact with our Facebook and Instagram pages at SKNIS Media and SKNIS Info.
Welcome back to InFocus. We continue our discussion with the Right Honorable Dr. Denzil Douglas, and he's looking back on 35 years of public service as we continue our discussion here on InFocus. So we just want to jump into, very quickly, some of the priorities that you had at the time when you, of course, steered this country. And I'm sure you would have had ideas as well, too, when you were in opposition, things that you would have seen. So what would you say are some of the major highlights and why? And I'll ask for 3 of them because, of course, you know, there's so many of them. But let's talk about the top 3 that you would have said.
The top 3. What are the top 3, really? I've been asked this question so many times. I think I was able to make a significant contribution in the continuation of the education of our people. I don't think you would ever understand how important it was to have been given a mandate when the former Labour administration of Sir Robert and Sir Limore and Fitzroy Bryant, when they exited, and we were then challenged to a large extent in the continuation of the education of our people. I think Bryant would go down in history as one of the foremost leaders in education in the Caribbean region. Because with the Charlie Mills bringing the comprehensive system of education into being by law, I think that changed our country. And to a large extent, I was not only part of the beneficiary, but I was able to continue on that path of leading our country into a completely new country by educating the masses of our people. And
it's not just education, so to speak, in terms of the reading, writing, arithmetic, as we would say, but you also had a particular focus on technical and vocational.
That's it.
And you also, of course, embraced the changes that were happening in the world in terms of technology.
Exactly.
So you integrated those things within education.
Exactly. And you're so right. I remember as a young teacher going to teachers and training college. But there was then the technical school, introduced to a large extent by our people with the assistance of Canada. And so our mechanics, our carpenters, etc., who did not get the opportunity to go to grammar school and did metalwork and technical drawing and woodwork, were able to go off to the technical college and provided the skills for our nation, for it to build. And then later on, recognizing the state of play in Sadler's, in that part of the country, where we had built high schools in Sandy Point, in Keor, had opened up the high schools in Basseterre, converting what was then a senior school to junior and senior high school, the convent school being there, 1 or 2 private schools. But then the people in my part of the country, having had the opportunity to go to Sandy Point High, Charles E. Mills Secondary now, and not to Keon, because Keon is a little out of our way, but there was need in particular to educate more of our people in that area. Sadler's was actually the last of the all-age schools that existed in this country. And so it was important with the cabinet that I led to have introduced in Sadler's Secondary School. A lot of people don't understand it up to now. It was supposed to be picking up from where the technical college would have left off in those days. We wanted to make sure that children who were bright, very academic, Spanish, French, etc., English, etc., but if they had within them the urge to become our future engineers and to use skills to progress their own careers and their lives, they should be able to do it early and not if they are just dropouts from fourth form. So that school was built with the very strong impression that people would be able to have mixed academic and skilled education within the same walls. World Bank financed it. I don't think it has progressed in that direction fully as it was envisaged to be, but there's still time. And that is why I think that education was very, very impactful for us, especially someone like me coming from that part of the country. But it was not only at that level. Not only at that level, we followed up on what we met with regard to the preschool education system, but then tertiary level education. UE was not always accessible to a lot of our people. You had to be either top or you could borrow the money to go on to UE. But then, because of the foreign policy that we had pursued, especially with countries like the United States of America, through the United States Virgin Islands, with Professor Hendrickson and Dr. Mills and those guys were there at the UVI. We were able to forge a relationship to provide most of our people with assisted scholarship funds so that they can go on and get their degree right there next door in St. Thomas and St. Croix.
Right. Okay, so that covers the education aspect to an extent, of course. And so the other top two that you would mention now?
Housing, of course. Mm-hmm. Housing.
I saw an article in doing research for this interview that up to 2008 there was some 2,500 houses that were built, and of course there were another 500 that were supposed to be delivered through a new scheme, and that would include Carifesta housing project, Bayview housing project,
yes.
You know, several of them. Housing you mentioned is second for you.
A real revolution, and people don't understand the development, housing developments at Carifesta village and what is it? CARICOM and Carifesta.
CARICOM. It's Carifesta and CARICOM on the other side.
Those were done within record time. I had a chat with Carlisle Jeffers. He was the main architect of that in terms of, he was the first CEO, and we had Kelvin from Newton Ground in Lamberts. He was the first CEO of the NHC. So the NHC was created. I want to thank people who sat on the first board, Scratch Ward and those guys, Halver and they, who went to Trinidad, looked at what was happening in Trinidad and said, we can do something like that here, and created the National Housing Corporation out of the remnants, of the ashes, I would say, of the Central Housing Authority, which was used in colonial times. So here we were, providing our people with shelter. If you want to improve the health of people, you must have them properly sheltered. They must have access to the modern amenities, disposal of solid waste, disposal of human waste. All those are part of naturally building a healthy community and country. So housing was critical. For those who couldn't afford it, and after the hurricane came and dashed away their small chattel houses, we gave them something called the first starter homes. Half a hogshead they called them. But they were well needed to start people at different levels. I want to really commend persons like C.G. Clyburn, because he was really one of the main architects that led that revolution. And then Asim Martin, Dr. Martin, who really ensured that the housing situation in St. Kitts and Nevis was not only providing proper shelter, proper health needs and so forth, but became collateral, where our people became owners of property, when in the past they were always renting or made to live on the hillsides and the gut sides in thatch houses.
And of course, houses are generational assets. So with that, now we ask for the third one.
Obviously, I would think that the third one was diversification of the economy. I think it's a known fact that we transitioned the economy from sugar agriculture to services, and we did so successfully. Not one man had a riot, no demonstrations. People were fairly treated, although later on we had some who were scheming, who were saying to the sugar workers that they didn't get enough money. Nonsense, absolute nonsense. Schemers were saying that. Today, we transitioned successfully from a country whose economy was led by sugar agriculture to one services, hospitality, tourism, one that brought hotels, building a hotel, 900 rooms, employed well over 1,000 people, opening their doors to serve our people and tourists, provided jobs for more than 900 people, permanent jobs, and we did several hotels. In the midst of the crisis, the economic and financial crisis, back 2009, 2010, when countries were failing, economies were faltering, we didn't close at all. We used the SIDF, the Sugar Industry Diversification Foundation, founded to help transition our people, our workers, from a life of sugar to one of services. That important institution made the difference. And when our young men got restless and our young ladies and could not find jobs during those times, we created the work, not the work, the
Yes program.
Well, the Yes program first when we got in, but by the time we were transitioning, it was the PEP, People's Empowerment Program. And young ladies were developing skills at the work site, masonry, going and developing their own businesses, creativity, innovation. We asked them to come and get at least maybe 5,000 to start, 15,000. Start up your businesses. You don't have to worry immediately on paying it back. You don't have to worry on paying it back immediately, but use it to start. And once you start, we know that you would continue.
And of course, the focus, as you would have referred to earlier, in terms of the understanding of what is important to drive the economy.
Exactly.
Getting people independent, the skills.
Skills.
It's all about empowering persons with the skills.
Exactly.
So that they can work for themselves if they need to, that they can provide for their families.
Good.
Right. So, Dr. Douglas, there's also something that I would need to mention as you talk about the local impact that you have. I don't think we can leave out the discussion that you made on a regional level. And there's one thing I would want to focus you on in terms of the health. I just spoke about housing and important it is for persons to be healthy. And very briefly, you know, because we're running out of time for the program, and we do want to speak about your book.
Yes.
But, we
Sorry
want
about
to talk about the contributions that you made as it relates to HIV and AIDS,
yes,
and also non-communicable diseases.
Good. A moment ago, I mentioned, you know, whether I expected to be in public life in this way. And that's an area that I must mention, because still had the opportunity, although I went into the political arena, I still had the opportunity eventually, as one of the leaders in the Caribbean region, to use my medical knowledge and skills and not only localized it, but to a large extent regionalized it and globalized it. And so at one time I was one of 3 doctors who were leaders in the Caribbean. Montserrat had medical doctor surgeon, also BVI had a surgeon. And I was given the task, however, of being the chief spokesperson for CARICOM on health matters, health and human resource development. So that came in very, very handy. My background in medicine came in very, very handy to tackle what was one of the world's worst epidemics in those days, HIV/AIDS, human immunodeficiency virus, killing thousands of people. And little St. Kitts and Nevis and the Caribbean region was making headlines as one of those regions where the incidence of AIDS was too high, and therefore had begun to retard not only the human development, but also the overall economic development of the Caribbean region. Because if you can't have healthy workers, and if you're spending millions of dollars and you don't know exactly how you're going to deal with this pandemic, naturally it's a downward trend. And so I was able to use my knowledge, my understanding, my political longevity, got the respect of my colleagues, and I was able to lead on that. I don't think you understand how important it was to me to sit and stand and discuss on the global stage with people like President Clinton, Nyerere of Uganda, Mbeki of Nigeria, sit, and of course the President of Prime Minister of Bangladesh and sit on the stage with them to speak of how the Caribbean region, through the Pan-Caribbean Partnership Against HIV/AIDS, was dealing with this overwhelming health challenge that we had.
And it was recognized as a best practice by the United Nations.
It was recognized as a best practice to be adopted by regions around the world. Look at what PANCAP of the Caribbean region was doing. And you can use that as a model to fight the pandemic in your own countries. And so to a large extent, I was very pleased then to have been a medical doctor. And even though I didn't see it when I first ventured back in 1989, it was then coming home to me that the background that I had attained was critically important in moving our country and the region forward.
And some of those stories, Dr. Douglas, are contained, of course, in 2 books that you have written.
Yes.
You recently had a book launch at the ECCB where your book, Making a Difference, was launched, and of course, we want to talk about that. But before we do that,
yes,
we want to talk about the first book that you published.
Yes.
And it's called Coming of Age.
Coming of Age.
Tell us a bit about what compelled you really to begin documenting your time in government, and actually I mentioned that there's 17 minutes left, so in our interview here.
Right, Coming of Age really was published because as you went along in the life in politics, you realized that people would want to write your story for you, and you should never allow that to happen as long as you're alive. So I said, with all that some people thought and who I was, I said, I can best describe myself, and I can best document what the policies, the programs, the ideas were that caused certain policies to become part and parcel of the political, economic, and social development of St. Kitts and Nevis. And they were all embodied by the speeches I would have given over a period of time. So, Coming of Age was basically documenting the first 10 years that I was in office. Remember, it was back in 2004 that we took that important leap forward after 10 years in closing the sugar industry. So the title really was basically saying, St. Kitts and Nevis has come of age, as is embodied in Denzil Douglas, moving forward on the political stage with greater strides to achieve that goal, that agenda that was left for us when I got in there in 1989.
Coming of Age spans 1995 to 2004, as you mentioned.
That is correct.
Making a Difference now spans 2005
right.
to 2015.
Right.
Tell us a bit about
Right.
this.
So after realizing that you were there for 10 years and you had made certain significant decisions with the help of your cabinet colleagues, now, how do we really make a difference over the next 10 years? And that is what is documented in the second book. The actual difference that we made, having prepared ourselves, having coming of age after 10 years, you now want to make sure that the legacy was properly documented and, in fact, form the basis of the manuscript in moving forward. And that is what it is all about. Simply reminding people of the thinking among the leadership of our party, those who assisted in framing the initial ideas in draft form, and I poring over them meticulously to ensure that they were conveying to the people what I wanted to convey as Denzil Douglas, the Prime Minister.
No, the book contains a collection of speeches, and it sounds very, for me personally, when I first heard it, I'm like, well, is it really going to be something interesting? Why would I be interested in terms of reading speeches that you gave so long ago? But I understand the format is really modified, so it's not just a collection of speeches per se, but there also are your thoughts included in there to basically tell a story, as you mentioned, the best way that you can do it. No one else can tell your story.
No one can do it except myself. And so I'm really, really grateful for the opportunity to have been given longevity, relative longevity in life. All of our leaders, they didn't get the opportunity to do what I have done. They would have passed. And although they were great men, having done great things, a lot of it is not documented. And that was not going to be my case at this time of service. I wanted to make sure it was documented, people understood where we were, people understood what was happening in the party, in the movement which created the party, what was happening in the country in terms of the decisions that were taken in the cabinet, the decisions of the cabinet moving forward to the parliament, made into laws and resolutions that would govern our people for time immemorial until the next leader or leaders will change. That is what it is all about. That's what it is all about.
And those stories are captured in the books, which really brings up an interesting question in terms of how you have evolved as a human being, as a humanitarian,
right,
as a politician over the years. But before you answer,
yes,
we're going to take a very short break again. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more In Focus.
If you haven't done it as yet, please do it today. Subscribe to our YouTube page at SKNIS Media for regular updates, live coverage, and even more information on your government. While you're at it, like, share, and interact with our Facebook and Instagram pages at SKNIS Media and SKNIS Info.
And we are back with In Focus, and we'll continue our conversation with the Right Honourable Dr. Denzil Douglas, who is celebrating 35 years of service to the people of St. Kitts and Nevis here. So, Dr. Douglas, as we mentioned before we left, we want to talk about your evolution as a leader, as a humanitarian, as a politician over the years. How would do you see yourself there?
Well, I think that if I were to mark myself, I would say that I've done maybe A plus. What do you think? A minus?
Well, I would say the people's opinion matters more than mine.
Exactly. So that's the whole point. I think that I have done what I was asked to do by the people of Number 6. Not only make a difference in their lives, but using their support, their guidance, using our background as a people in constituency Number 6, Newton Ground, St. Paul's, Deep Bay, Parsons, Sadler's, but before Sadler's, of course, and Harris's, but making sure that what I was sent there to do would have been achieved. I don't think that I've accomplished everything that maybe should have been accomplished. But I think
there is one question that I did want to ask as well,
right.
in terms of, out of so many things that you have done, what haven't you done that you would like to see accomplished?
Right. Well, it's not a trick question, but I don't want to say too much because I may be misquoted. But I really think, though, that the understanding of my people in number 6 and asking them to recognize that we are the leaders. Number 6 is the leader of the constituencies, and reaching out to them in almost every election. Let us help those other constituencies which are weaker than us so that we will form a government to move our country forward. I think I've asked them every opportunity for their support to let us do that, because in every single Labour government they were always there. This is the time, I believe, when my own colleagues should realize the importance of constituency number 6. I want the people of number 6 to also realize that within me and with me there, their interest is always being pursued. There are a number of our people, young people, qualified, unemployed. Impact has been made. Do you know that with the Cuban scholarships, my constituency has the highest number of doctors per capita? But there are others who still today have degrees, still can't find work. Mind you, maybe it is typical of the entire country. But we must therefore make sure that we are relentless in finding opportunities to advance our people, especially those who have labored as labor supporters over the years. They must not be forgotten ever. They must be part of every solution of advancement and development in this country. We have moved them from being in an environment of dirt poor, being dirt poor, working class, and working hard and educating themselves to enter the ranks of the middle class. They should be given the opportunity to advance wherever they want to be in the future. And our children in number 6 must never ever be forgotten.
Dr. Douglas, your 35 years of public service here in St. Kitts and Nevis was recently recognized, and those who are watching the program earlier would have seen some pictures of you, and of course they're on social media as well too, where your cabinet colleagues would have surprised you, and having members from former cabinets over the years as well too. And also during the recent sitting of Parliament, members of Parliament on both sides of the aisle spoke very glowingly about you and really reflected on the contributions that you have made. What does that mean to you personally, especially given that, as I mentioned, it came from both sides of the aisle?
It meant something to me, because on many occasions a person is not necessarily honored by his own colleagues or country, as you may widen it, citizens. And it was really important to hear, especially from the other side, comments which I think were practical and which were genuine.
And honest.
And honest. That's it. Of course, the Parliament in which I serve presently and which I had served so many years before is almost new in terms of the people. And so to hear generations of people who are now, the present generation of people who are now there, speak publicly, it meant something. Because some of them would have been kids when I started out my service and when I became Prime Minister. Kids, and they said it. Each could attest something that impacted his or her life. And, you know, I always enjoyed the back and forth in the Parliament. And there was Premier Brantley,
yes.
who is an opposition side, and remembered because I was going to say it. But he said it first. Remembered when he said, you are in the departure lounge, you know, time for you to go. But then he's now in the departure lounge. I'm not saying it's time for him to go, he must know. But to have that kind of friendly exchange when originally those same exchanges took place in the heat of debate in the Parliament, to some extent was quite rewarding to know that though we are on different sides, we can still enjoy a camaraderie among us. So it was really, really good. I think that it was one of those events, and I want to thank those persons who organized to fool me, to surprise me, delayed me in the cabinet room so that there was time for the guys to assemble downstairs, and then kept asking me about when I'm going to eat and so forth, if I'm going to go outside, so that we can close the debate, we can close the Parliament. And I've been present to hear their comments. I think it was good, and I want to thank all of my colleagues for their intervention and their support.
Finally, any advice that you have for the younger generation who may not look on public service as something that is worthwhile, is something that is fulfilling?
I want to really encourage persons to follow their hearts. If you have a passion for something, maybe you don't know that it could be revealed eventually. I remember when I was in 6B, closing 6B in school, I was approached by the Labour Party to run as a candidate. I was not even finished sixth form. And I said no. You know, I just wanted to finish school. But I didn't know that at that early age, people were looking at me. So that's what I'm saying. And I although I always felt, people told me that I was going to be a lawyer because I argued a lot. I was always debated and so forth. But in the end, you know, so I think people should follow their heart. Do what you like doing. I used to like to debate and argue and so forth. And maybe this was preparing me for what I am today. So people should follow your heart. Young people, follow your hearts for God's sake. Prepare yourself for any eventuality. You may have a career choice, but at the same time, be as broad as possible in preparation for that career choice. And I believe if you do that, you would hold yourself in good stead for a bright and prosperous and successful future. You are our future. Prepare yourself for that future.
And I think importantly, don't be afraid to change, because many a times persons would have had an idea what they want to pursue in life.
Good.
And when an opportunity opens up, of course, they fall into something else. Like you mentioned, you planned on being a medical doctor, and of course you achieved that, but you didn't go on to specialize. And I think, Dr. Douglas, the impact that you had on persons as a medical doctor, it's obvious. But as a politician and as a leader, not just in St. Kitts and Nevis, but in CARICOM, and as you mentioned in terms of on the international stage, that brought you even more impact in terms of that you were able to affect
Thank you.
more persons' lives. And that is something that, you know, we always have to mention. Don't be afraid of what is new, of changing, because you never know what door could lead to where.
Exactly.
And so, sir, we'd like to thank you very much for joining us on this edition of InFocus. We hope that you will be back soon. I do remember the last time you were here that you promised to come back and talk to us a bit about some of the investments that you were involved in terms of senior minister. And we hope to find some time to fit you into that schedule so that you can come back and have that discussion, update the general public in terms of what you're doing as a senior minister within this current government.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you very, very much. Thanks to the management of this radio station, this television station, and of course, those technicians who are here with you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Douglas, and we'd like to thank you, members of our audience, for being with us for this edition of InFocus. We trust that you will join us next week at the same place at the same time. I'm Ian Richards.
Join us every Wednesday for InFocus, a weekly talk show produced by the St. Kitts Nevis Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. InFocus, your government, your business.